been working at DQ for a long time now. However, I never really enjoyed working there because it was an old rundown venue. And by rundown, I mean the entire place was decaying. But it didn't end there. Even when I was supposed to take a leak, I felt like doing it outside because the restroom was awful, and the foul stench from the toilets made me want to vomit. However, roaches shamelessly crawled everywhere across the sinks and kitchen tables. So, seeing that this establishment was still running and open to the public, the worst part was that I was always the last one to leave and work alongside my socially awkward colleague, whom I never really understood. It's safe to say that all of us at DQ kept our distance from the guy. He seemed almost invisible even to our manager, and the only time I saw him was when only 2 of us were left in the restaurant. Unfortunately, no one wanted to stay long enough to help, not even the manager. So, I was stuck with this creepy looking kid named Frank. I called him a kid because he looked 5 years younger than me, but we never really had a meaningful conversation in the many years I worked there. Meanwhile, I called him creepy because it always seemed like he was in a world of his own. He had the strange habit of looking blankly into space, his head and hands fidgeting like he had a psychomotor condition, and it looked even creepier whenever I was alone at the counter while his back was turned against me. He would always gaze outside the drive-thru window, waiting for some poor soul to drop by and give their order. However, if I were to be more optimistic about this, I noticed that he was always on time despite his weirdness. Then again, it didn't change that he smelled like he hadn't showered in days. In fact, he smelled so bad that he had the scent of a rat's decomposing corpse. Staying near him made me want to throw up. So, it was practical to keep my distance. But if there was anything I appreciated more than his punctuality, it would be all the moments when he insisted on closing up shop, asking me to head home first. Once, I tried to spark a conversation and said,
"Thanks for always taking the initiative, dude, but can I ask why you never want me to close the shop?"
It took him a while to respond. Then, he said,
"Does it matter? You get to go home sooner than later, right? Fine, have it your way then."
I said, "Of course." I was only trying to be friendly since no one else at work had the will to approach him. But with that attitude, I immediately understood why he was a loner. Then, over time, when I started showing up earlier than usual at work, I was surprised to see that Frank was already there. And I thought it was odd, because Frank often had to close up shop at around 2 in the morning. So, I wondered how he could have very little sleep and still manage to come at 5 a.m. One night, while driving home, I checked my pocket and panicked when I didn't find my wallet there. I stopped the car as it rained heavily outside, but as I searched thoroughly inside the vehicle, I was frustrated to find out that I had left it back in the restaurant. So, I drove back to that dilapidated place they call a restaurant and decided to enter through the back door. It was already about 2 a.m. and I was so exhausted, but I thought Frank had already gone home since it was so late. So, holding my flashlight, I took out the keys and opened the door. I crept inside as quietly as possible as I headed for the lockers. Then, while taking my stuff, I heard what I could only describe as a snarling sound. I was caught off guard, my adrenaline pumping like crazy. So, I first thought of a bear or a squirrel getting in, and if that were the case, I needed something to drive them away. Therefore, I picked up a mop and held it up in a defensive position as I sauntered quietly toward the source of the sound. Unfortunately, the lights were all out, so I could only rely on my flashlight. But as I crouched behind the counter and took a peek inside the kitchen, my jaw dropped at the sight of what appeared to be a feral animal with clothes on. It was definitely human, but what terrified me was that I recognized the initial DQ logo on the back of the man's shirt. My heart stopped when the man turned to face me, revealing it to be none other than Frank eating ice cream like a psychotic maniac. He didn't say a word. Instead, he gave me a sinister grin with eyes that were round and strained. Then, as I backpedaled, Frank charged at me, pumping my adrenaline even more as I ran the hell out of there. Moments later, I reached the car and drove off as the lunatic ran after me. He was like a freaking athlete who went nuts. I was so petrified that I couldn't tell my boss or the cops. Since Frank didn't cause me any physical injuries, there was nothing I could report. Therefore, I kept it a secret. However, the next day, my boss called me up. frantically telling me that the restaurant was on fire and that he had no choice but to lay off all employees. After the cops conducted the investigation, they speculated the high probability was that squatters had been living in DQ's basement, which caused the fire. But I knew exactly who was behind this, and now it became clear why he was always punctual, had a foul scent, and always initiated to close the shop. This story was inspired by an incident that happened at a Dairy Queen in South London on December 4th of 2021. It was alleged that the once popular ice cream destination went up in flames on a Friday night. At the scene, a fire inspector mentioned that there was evidence that squatters have been inside the building and had been living in there. The restaurant has since been demolished. I didn't mind working at Dairy Queen. I never had to wake up early in the morning as my shifts were always scheduled in the afternoon until closing, and I usually didn't actually have to do too much. The location didn't have a drive-thru and wasn't the most popular fast food place in town, so all I had to do was get a few dozen people through ordering their food over the course of the day and clean things up after hours. One night, however, this relatively easy job became a nightmare. At midnight, I said goodbye to my coworker who was doing the cooking all day and flipped the open sign to closed after he walked out the door. Then, I got to work cleaning up the restaurant just to keep the boss happy when he came in the next morning. About 20 minutes later, I was startled by a super loud banging sound. I jerked my head around and saw a gigantic man banging his fist on the glass like a psycho. This dude was an absolute freak of nature. He was huge, as in tall, like Shaq tall, but was so skinny that he looked more like Slender Man. He was also wearing a Lakers jersey and basketball shorts, which made him seem like he was an old retired player who got kicked off the team because he failed the piss test. The shorts and jersey were tiny on him, and so tight that they could not have been comfortable. All that was topped by a ridiculous hairstyle that made him look like he wanted to be the grandpa from Rick and Morty. When he knew that I was looking at him, he stopped pounding his fists and pressed his lips up to the glass, moaning the single word,
"Swirl."
I stared at him, confused and honestly terrified, then pointed to the sign on the door and yelled at him to go away.
"Can't you read? We're closed."
I knew he could hear the fear in my voice because he didn't move. He actually smiled, completely unfazed. I tried to act like I wasn't bothered and went back to what I was doing, but the whole time my back was turned. I could feel his eyes completely fixed on me. Eventually, I started to get the feeling that he was never going to leave, which made me dread the thought of trying to go home and possibly crossing paths with him. At some point, I couldn't even focus on working anymore, so I figured I'd cave in and let him in, just so he could get what he wanted and just leave me alone. As soon as I unlocked the door, he charged through and pushed me to the side, sprinting to the counter and stood there like he was waiting for me to take his order. I prepared myself for an awkward encounter while I walked behind the counter.
What can I get you, sir? Swirl. You mean like a cone? Swirl. And what flavor would you like? Swirl.
I couldn't get anything out of him except for that same single word he was saying before, so I defaulted on giving him vanilla. It started to seem obvious that this guy had some kind of mental deficiency if he couldn't communicate beyond the word swirl, but in a weird way this was actually a little comforting. I was able to trick myself into believing that he wasn't trying to get into the store after hours for any bad reason, and that he was too slow to understand that we were supposed to be closed. When I handed the small vanilla swirl to the giant standing in front of me, it looked ridiculously tiny in his massive hands that I almost wanted to laugh.
That'll be $1.99. Change. So you can say more than one word. Change! Alright, jeez.
I figured he was about to hand me a couple of ones, and so I opened the register. But as soon as I opened it, the maniac threw the cone away and wrapped his hands around the register, ripping it off the counter like it was nothing. He shook all the money to the ground, then tossed the register to the side and started picking up all the change. I watched without thinking about trying to stop him. It was clearly no use as I was outmatched. After he collected all the cash, the giant psycho finally ran off. I rushed to the door right behind him and locked it so he wasn't able to get inside again. I was pretty shaken up by the whole thing, but I was just freaked out by the sheer speed of that freak alone. He moved faster than I've ever seen a human move. Of course, that didn't change anything about the fact that I just let the store get robbed. So I called my boss to tell him what happened, but unfortunately, he didn't answer. He was most likely asleep and wouldn't be awake until the next morning. I was about to call the cops, but stupidly decided to sweep it under the rug and not prolong the situation. I just wanted to go home, so I did a lazy job of finishing up and got ready to leave the place a mess and deal with the consequences later. When I got to the door, I remembered that that freak might still be out there, so I went to the back door instead. I took a deep breath. Then I bolted outside and ran to my car as fast as I could. I jumped inside and shut the door, finally feeling real relief for about 3 seconds, until I realized I'd forgotten my keys. Now, I was going to have to go back out there, find my keys in the store, come out and lock the door to the shop, then come back through the parking lot again. But then another realization dawned on me, a much more terrifying one. How did I get in my car without unlocking it? I always lock my car when I leave it. That's when I felt a pair of giant ice-cold hands wrapping around my face.
Sorrel.
This story was inspired by an incident regarding a large man who happened to rob the exact same Dairy Queen restaurant twice in one day. Police were called to a Dairy Queen for an armed robbery, where a man who was reportedly armed left the business with cash. But the suspect even tried to carjack the same DQ worker in the drive-thru of the business later on, but fortunately failed. The suspect got away on foot and police weren't able to track him down. About 2 hours later, police received another call that the same man was trying to rob the same Dairy Queen. The suspect ran from the scene, but police set up a perimeter and used night vision equipment to find him hiding in a field. The suspect tried running, but was eventually caught. I regret getting stuck working at Dairy Queen. I'm trapped on the minimum wage hamster wheel, working over 40 hours a week to barely pay rent, and still struggle with the rest of my bills. What makes me hate my job even more is the sloppy people I have to deal with. Most days, I honestly feel like more of a janitor than a fast food employee. It's no shock to anyone that the restrooms in a greasy ice cream joint aren't the nicest, but I swear, the ones I have to clean on an almost hourly basis are the nastiest dysentery incubators I've ever seen. Every time I turn my back on them, somebody has clogged the toilet or cut their hair in the sink, or just straight up crapped on the floor, and nobody else bothers to handle the mess but me. I'm there 5 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week, watching my life wither away surrounded by ice cream and angry downtrodden people. We get everyone, the wackos, the whales, the hobos, the Karens, everybody. But out of everyone and everything I've had to put up with, there's one woman, one particularly horrible Karen, who pops into my mind whenever I think about work. She was this creepy older woman that had this trashy look about her, like she smoked 10 packs a day. She ended up being a regular, and I would always see her slink into the bathroom where she would stay for an hour or two every time she came in, which was every other day without fail. Initially, I didn't want to be judgmental, because she could have been taking the absolute biggest crap of her life, and this was the only bathroom she had access to. But after it went on for a couple of weeks, everyone who worked there caught on and got fed up with her hogging the bathroom all the time. That's when my manager kindly confronted her and said that if she wanted to keep using our bathroom, she would have to buy something. A few days later was a much different story. I was standing at the register waiting for customers, and that's when she walked in. I tried to greet her, but she clearly wasn't in the mood.
Good evening, ma'am. How can I help you today?
Hurry up with my ice cream, damn it! I need something to lick, and I ain't talking about my husband!
I'm sorry, ma'am. Will it be a small blizzard for you again?
You already know what I'm going to order, punk! Now! Make it quick, or else I'm gonna make my own ice cream with the dairy milk coming from my bacon strips!
As she usually did, She came up $1 short, which would end up coming out of my pocket. I didn't really care though, as $1 was worth a lot less to me than the trouble of bothering the Mega Karen about it. An hour or so passed, and the store was about to close for the night. That woman's ice cream had long since melted, but everybody knew who it belonged to, so nobody threw it away. My manager ordered me to clean the restrooms, which immediately filled me with dread, because I knew that she was still in there. I got to work anyway, thoroughly cleaning the men's room first in the hopes that this would give her enough time to finish up whatever in the world she was doing and get out. Unfortunately, the door to the women's room was still locked when it was time to go in and clean it. I knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I knocked again and yelled to the other side that the store was closing, but still nothing. My last resort was telling her that her ice cream was going to melt if she didn't go get it, but not even that resulted in a response. I forced myself to do the last thing I wanted to do, knowing that my rent depended on it. I unlocked the door, then held my breath and slowly opened it. Inside, I saw that Karen sprawled out on the floor, twitching and drooling, completely fried out of her mind on God knows what. As soon as I appeared in her line of sight, she crashed down back to earth and flipped out, jumping to her feet and screaming at me.
What the hell are you doing in here, you goddamn disgusting pervert?
Hey, calm down. The store's closing and I'm just trying to clean up.
Don't you dare lie to me, Mr. Peeping Tom. I know you wanted to catch me on the toilet while you listened for some ASMR sounds, didn't you?
Let me go!
Where's my order? I had a blizzard! What did you people do with it?
It's been right there waiting for you, lady.
What the hell is this crap?
What? What's wrong with it?
It's melted! Make me another blizzard before I call the cops and tell them you ripped me off! Ah!
What the hell is your problem, lady?
DQ! DQ! DQ sucks!
Hey, calm down. I have to clean that up.
Don't you play dumb with me. It's your job to clean up, Mr. Whipped Cream.
I only get minimum wage.
As you should. I'm sure you're used to going on your knees and licking things up.
Get the hell out of here or I'm calling the cops.
Screw you! I'm not going back to prison.
Get out now.
Fine, but not because you said so. You haven't seen the last of me.
Look at all this mess I have to clean up. Oh. This is all I have.
This story was inspired by an incident regarding a chaotic Dairy Queen Karen who threw a hissy fit because her ice cream she ordered melted as she was in the restroom. It was alleged that the woman was in there for approximately 20 minutes doing undisclosed substances. In the video, the Karen could be seen screaming profanities and causing a tirade. One can only imagine what her DQ order was.